Katie Oelker, maybe our youngest guest ever on Retire Sooner podcast. So Katie Oelker is probably our first guest that is square in the fire. Would it be fair to say square in the fire movement? Or are you, because you're only how old are you?
35.
So you're young and you've got how many kids?
2.
2 kids.
Yeah.
And you were I'm going to go right into fire.
Please.
So fire is, for our listeners, let's define what fire is.
Okay.
What's that acronym mean?
Yeah, so FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Okay.
And I thought it was like a relatively new term when I came across it, but it's actually been around for a while. And there's lots of people, in the circle of personal finance that are fired, they say, which means they have retired early. And essentially, they retired early, but they have enough funds in retirement or enough real estate, typically is the other way, where they have passive income to cover all of their bills. And they don't have to work anymore in the traditional sense. Right.
So the fire move, financial independence, retire early. If you're fired, you are kind of done working in a lot of the sense of the word. So you're not fired though?
Not fired.
Or are you on the fire track? Because you're still young. Yeah. You're still in your 30s.
Yes.
Sakes.
I know. Yeah, we are. Our goal is something called Barista Fire, which is I think also new. There's a lot of different fires. So there's like Coast Fire and Fat Fire.
Whoa! You got to tell me. Coast Fire, Barista Fire.
Yeah.
I think I might know what that means.
Okay.
Let's start. Okay. And what else?
Fat Fire is another one.
Fat as in fat people or P?
No, fat spelled like fat. Yep. F-A-T. Yep.
Fat fired.
Yep.
Okay.
There's probably some other ones, but those are
3 that I've never even heard of. Check off another podcast where I learned something I had no idea about. So let's start with Coast.
Yeah.
What is let's start with Barista, because that one I think it makes sense. A Barista Fire is what?
Barista Fire is where you have saved enough to the point where you can cover, or I should say invest enough, but you've invested enough where you are able to take out a certain percentage and you can cover most of your bills, but maybe you're still going to work part-time. So that's where the barista, get a fun job, a barista job. Or
is that fun?
Something.
It seems like a brutal job.
Well, I actually worked as a barista and it was pretty fun, but I was in my early 20s, I had lots more energy then. So maybe that's why it was fun. But
but you've got caffeine all day. Do you drink caffeine all day as a barista, or you don't really need to?
I mean, I feel like you don't really need to.
Because you're
moving
hopping
around.
all over.
Yeah. But
is that it's funny because we think of it, that as a relaxing place for us. We're like, oh, it's so nice to be in a coffee shop for a little while.
Yeah.
But when you're working there, is it actually fun, or it just seems like you're constant? It's very fast paced, there's no break.
Yeah, it's pretty fast paced. I think it's fun if your coworkers are fun, right? And I thought it was fun to make different coffee drinks and serve customers, but again, that was 15 years ago. Okay. So
Barista Fire that's I just need a little bit of a job in order to make a little bit of money and maybe get benefits too.
Yep, and potentially get benefits.
Okay.
And then also, if you're working part-time, that might give you some other opportunities to travel or to do experiences that you wouldn't be able to do if you just fired. So it kind of gives you a little bit more leeway. And a lot of people in the fire world are Barista Fire because they end up starting a personal finance business. They, start talking about fire movement and how they fired. And then that turns into a blog or a podcast.
And that's their barista.
And then that's their income stream. And whether or not, they might have fired not thinking that they were going to do that. So I just talked to somebody today. I was like, oh yeah, I fired. But then I realized it's kind of boring. So
wait, what is boring? What's boring?
Being retired at an early age. This gentleman was probably, maybe 40 years old. And he was so I started this business, blog that's turned into now, we got a YouTube channel, all these things. And that's that's my thing that I focus on. And it gives me income, to do even more.
How many do you know? So do you know people, a lot of people within the movement.
Yeah.
How many people did get bored?
I think the majority of people do. But I think they realize that, the time independence that they have was 100% worth it to fire and not having to stress about, making ends meet and paying for bills or even just, investing anymore. But I think then when once you get down to the day in and day out of not having something to focus on, not having like either a passion project or a side hustle or a part-time job, then they're like, ooh, like I feel like something is maybe missing. So most of all the people I know that are in their like 30, 40, 50s have done something part-time-ish. Unless they're like traveling the world and that's like what they do. But then they still are usually like blogging about it or something.
So that's the fire. So give me I want to get to Coast Fire and Fat Fire, which I really don't know what these are. What would give me the profile, the prototypical, not the non-outlier? So like the fire, sure, you went to Facebook and you had $15 million on Facebook stock and you were 28 and you're done. Give me the prototypical median. Give me the median person that's actually been able to do the true fired.
I would say the median.
What do they look like? And how much money do they have? That's my real question.
Yeah, so I think younger people that are fired are typically DINKs. Do you know what that acronym is?
Double income, no kids?
Yep. Yep. So I see that a lot. So double income, no kids, they're able to, sock away one person's income right away. Like, there's someone I know who is 30s or maybe even younger than 30, and she has a great job. Her husband has a great job, and they knew about fire early. So they got out of college, started making, 6 figures each, and they were like, we're going to put away one salary
the whole entire
for every year. So it's like, when you're investing $100 and some $1,000 every year, it can add up pretty quickly. So that is an example, like, but they also knew about the movement earlier. I would say like typical though, people that end up retiring early are, most people are like in their 40s, 50s, and they may have children that are, maybe one child, maybe two. Like they typically don't have like a ton of children, although I do know somebody who has like 5 kids and is fired. But so it's like, maybe less kids, more income, and they've learned about the fire movement relatively early, or they learned about it and they're like saving, just all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're going to like downsize our home and throw all our money into investments and see how quickly we can get there.
And do they usually have around $1 million or usually more than that, do you think?
I think more than that typically, but the thing about the fire movement is that, well, and we'll talk about fat fire in a minute, but most people that fire are really frugal.
So they stay frugal.
So they're like, I can only live, there's the whole like 4% rule that people talk about. So they're like, I'm going to take, 4% out and that's it. And then there's a lot of debate, like, is 4% too much? Or, should it be less if you're going to fire early? And then how long will your money last kind of thing? So most people are used to living off small amount, and that requires, not having any debt and having a certain lifestyle that, they can maintain over a long period of time.
Okay, so let's go to Coast Fire, because that seems antithetical to fire, because Coast is always expensive, and money's will be like another way of saying expensive. We were, the way the coasts work is like, they used to be able to get on the water for $1.5 million, $2 million. And then it was like 4 million, and then it was 7. It started to slowly go to I'm thinking of like the Gulf and call it the Rosemary Beach, Destin area, seaside. And then then COVID hit, and it went from almost totally out of reach to like 15, 20 million to get on the coast.
Yeah.
So to me, coast is like, that's super expensive. So what could Coast Fire possibly mean? Here it is. Let me guess. They had a house on the coast. And they bought it for $2 million and they sold it for 10, and then they could fire early.
That's a good guess, but it actually has nothing to do about the coast. The coast in a location sense. But I love that theory.
All right, what's Coast Fire?
Yeah, so Coast Fire is when you have saved, invested a certain amount of money, and you've realized that it's going to grow to the amount that you need by the time that you want to retire. So you might not want to retire yet, but you've got enough money invested that you're like, I don't need to invest any more money. I'm just going to let it coast. Ride the market.
It's going to as in roll.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to, compound interest, and it's going to just continue to grow. And then when we want to retire, we'll be set, and we won't have to, from now till then, we won't have to invest any more money.
Okay. That sounds a little bit like our retirement gray zone that we talk about. So that's a similar, I see that as in, let's say, a more traditional sense, somebody who might be 55 or late 50s, which is still a little early in the traditional sense. and they have saved as much as they need. They don't need to save anymore. They take on a little bit of a barista style and Coast. So I think our retirement gray zone is a slightly older version of Coast plus Barista Fire. So it's a very simple way to think about it. Yeah. All right, so what is Fat Fire? Well, let me guess on this one. Fat Fire would be, and it's F with not a PH.
It's F, yep.
Fat Fire. Maybe I had one big investment that did really well, and I'm again, maybe like a technology person with maybe a slightly smaller version than Peter Thiel's Roth. Are you familiar with that? Peter Thiel, he was one of the original investors in PayPal, and he put $2,000 in his Roth IRA, and it grew to $5 billion.
Yeah.
So Peter Thiel, that's a big fat investment, and he could retire early.
Yeah.
That's my best guess on the spot.
That's actually a pretty good guess. So Fat Fire is like the opposite of most people that fire, where most people that fire are being very frugal, and they are going to have to continue to be frugal. Whereas Fat Fire is like, they might not spend as much money now, but when they get to retirement, they want to be able to spend frivolously. So they might have a very luxurious lifestyle now, and they want to keep that in retirement. So they are just banking money. A lot of people that do Fat Fire are big into real estate. So they've got, they know they'll have a lot of cash flow, or they'll have appreciation, they'll be able to sell out and things. So yeah, so that's Fat Fire. You're close.
So it's a non-frugal Fat Fire.
It's a non-frugal fire.
Non-frugal fire.
Yep.
Non-frugal.
I think of fat stacks of cash. That's how I remember got a lot of money, and you want to continue to have a lot of money to live off of in retirement.
I feel like we're coming with a fire menu. So we're in Austin. As you're listening to the Retire Sooner podcast, you're hearing all these Austin references because at FinCon, all the best financial writers, the most interesting people like Katie Oelker are here, and we get to do lots of interviews in a short period of time. And I'm thinking of one of these Austin food trucks that I went to this, literally a Mexican hamburger food truck, which I've never even heard of, but it was awesome. And I'm thinking we're building our own menu of we're coming to the fire, but we could do, what would you like today? Coast Fire, Barista Fire, Fat Fire, regular fire? Just give me the traditional fire. Okay, we're talking to Joe Salsihai from Stacking Benjamins, and we were saying that fire is a relatively new movement, which you mentioned. They knew about fire early. Joe was just saying, look, the fire's been around forever. It just got an acronym 10 years ago, so it now became a movement, which is somewhat true. It's kind of I think it gained momentum. The easier it is for people to communicate something, it does spread faster. So yes, everyone's wanted to retire early since the beginning of time, but fire kind of gave a name to it, and I think maybe educated more people around it and did create kind of a movement. Yeah. When did you start thinking about this? And then at your stage at 35, when did you start thinking about fire?
I would say I probably learned about fire maybe 5 years ago or so. And, actually it was probably between 4 and 5 years ago. So
late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, early 30s, I would say, yeah. And so I learned about fire. I was working as a financial advisor at the time, and I had stumbled across probably a blog post or something along those lines. And it was talking about fire, and I was like, wow, this is a really interesting concept. Let me dig it. Let me go down the rabbit hole of the fire movement. And at that time, my husband and I, we were living in a small home, a suburb outside of in the Twin Cities area.
Milwaukee.
Minnesota.
I'm sorry.
Minnesota, yep.
Yeah.
So we were living outside of, in a small, we were like, we don't have a very large mortgage. And a lot of people in the fire movement, they pay off all their debt so that they have, less things to pay for in retirement when they retire early. So we were like, we could pay, I was like, talking about people paying off their mortgages, having no debt. I'm like, oh yeah, we could do this. We could pay off our mortgage, and we could, we're done with everything else, or we'll pay off all our other debt, and I think I had a few student loans left at that point. And so I was really motivated. And then we had our second kid, and I was like, I don't know if we're gonna stay in this house. We got a big dog, and all of a sudden it was, started to feel a little more crap. So I started writing about the FIRE movement at the time, particularly at that time I was writing about it for Business Insider. And so, I was like, this is our FIRE, like this is kind of our plan and this is what we'd like to do. Like we'd like to be, my initial term was debt-free by 40, including our mortgage. So that was, I was like, we're gonna be debt-free by 40. My husband's a few years older than me. So I'm like, I don't know who is 40, your 40 or my 40, but one of us, will be mortgage-free included. So that was like the tagline I used and when I was talking about it. And then, we were like, oh yeah, we're gonna buy a new house. And we bought the new house. We decided actually, it was a few years ago and the market is still crazy, but the market was crazy. And so we had saved enough to
Crazy starting to go higher.
Crazy, just like, multiple offers.
And again, what city,
we're outside of Minneapolis.
Right outside of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And real estate's just as going crazy there as it is everywhere else.
Yep. So we decided, we're gonna save up some money for a down payment on the next home, and then we'll figure out, then maybe we'll recast our mortgage. If we sell the other home, if it takes us a while, which it didn't, but if we sell that, then maybe we'll put the money back into our new mortgage, and so we'll have we'll still work towards paying off that mortgage. Well, my tune has kind of changed now as I've gotten more, into the personal finance and the FIRE world. And from an interest rate perspective and a tax write-off perspective, there's some benefits to having a mortgage when, the market is maybe returning a lot higher. So we actually, so we bought the new house, sold the old house, banked a bunch of the money, trying to figure out what to do. That was right before COVID hit. And then, COVID hit and I was like, ugh, like everybody else, okay, so now my husband works in the sports industry. Oh. Everything stopped. We're like, well, we better just save this money on top of the other money we have saved, just in case you completely lose your job and we're out of work.
Yeah,
I think everybody was. Time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we did that. So then, fast forward to now, we're still talking about the FIRE movement.
Hold on. What did you do? Did you buy another place?
No. So we moved. We bought a new place.
Oh, and then
we sold our old house.
And then COVID.
And that was right before COVID. Yeah, just a few months. So we were like, we're gonna recast. We're gonna put this money towards the mortgage and still work on our debt-free by 40 plan.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, and we're like, that messed that all up. But so the money, we kept it in just a savings account just to have liquid, yada yada. And now, now we're like, oh, there's other things we could do with that. So actually, we're in the process right now of buying a rental because now we decided we'd like that to be part of our long-term FIRE plan.
Overall, diversified ways you're going to have income in the future, which is it's smart to be able to do that. Hard to find a good property, but if you put some work into it, have you found it yet?
No, we have not. No, we've got all our finances in line and the pre-approvals, and we're just looking right now. And we're torn. We're new to real estate. So we talked about renting our first home, and then we were like, I don't know, we just don't want to have to deal with the hassle of that at that time. But now we're like, oh, that could have been that maybe would have been a good opportunity, but too late. That ship has sailed. So on to the next. So we're looking, but we're really torn. We like the idea now that my husband is also remotely working for the most part, and he travels.
What kind of sports is he? What kind of industry?
He works for a sports tech company
that
sells to teams and governing bodies.
Cool.
Soccer,
he's within the sports industry.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
so how has that changed then? So you're still in your own version of FIRE, and you guys could still see being by maybe 45. It's still super young, 10
Absolutely.
Years from now.
Yeah.
You're still going to be young.
Yep.
And is that the goal, to be then financially independent by 45?
Yeah, I think my absolute latest goal is I've got 50 as we're hopefully done, we're done. We maybe barista. We're still doing a business or something part-time or consulting or whatever it may be.
But now, in your mind, about how much capital do you think you guys would need? Now, granted, if you have real estate, it's different.
Yeah. So
than just liquid cash in the market savings.
Yeah. So I would say, we haven't really done the math with the real estate piece because it's a relatively new thing
for you guys,
that we've been just thinking about. So our first goal is to get to $1 million. So $1 million invested. That's our we get to $1 million, and then we need to try to figure out how much do we want to work and how much more extra money might real estate generate. I think if you were to run a realistic if you were to say how much money do you need in retirement? I think the calculator would probably say like 2.5 million or something like that.
For you guys.
For us, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so we're trying to figure that out. But we're.
It's cool to be able to talk to somebody kind of in the mid. You're not starting fire, and you're not finished fire. You're kind of in the middle of the fire journey, which is really cool.
Yeah, it feels like the beginning, but I mean, I feel like in the last few years, though, we've made some good progress. So.
I love the thought of all these different varieties of fire, and even you're kind of a mix between a lot of these. Yeah. I want to go through the habits that we learned from our parents early. So when you're a kid, what were the money habits you learned from your parents? Were they good with money or were they terrible with money?
Yeah. So my family was interesting because my dad was an accountant, and my mom worked as a seamstress, and she was a stay-at-home mom for my 2 younger brothers. For a good part of her life, and we grew up in what I would probably consider an upper middle class family, but my dad had a big gambling problem.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that was like super interesting.
Did you guys know?
Yeah, because our parents always argued about it.
Whoa.
So knew maybe older, I was probably middle school when I caught wind of what was going on, but high school, and then after high school, I was
So it lasted a long time.
It lasted a long time, yeah. And so it was interesting because, we, my family, we made a lot of money, we took nice vacations, we played, traveling sports, we had a nice home. But then there was that other side of it where people didn't know, addictions are typically under the radar, and not very many people knew that, my dad was an executive at a local, a Target. A Target is a local company. And people there kind of had an inkling, I think, or some people are starting to catch on. But yeah, I mean, he could go to the casino and drop 10, 20 grand in a day or two. And so that was as you can imagine, a big friction point between my parents growing up. And
was he, with a gambling addiction, was he always, he was just waiting for it to hit big, he wanted it to hit big, right? Or is it more of just liking to gamble?
I think it's, because there's times where he would be up 10-ish grand, but he couldn't stop. He had to lose it all to stop. I don't know if he ever really walked away very much, or maybe he would, but then he'd go back the next weekend or whatever and be gone. So so that was really interesting for me to watch growing up. And my parents otherwise, my dad was a really big giver, charitable giver. He saved for retirement very aggressively. And but he took out $100,000 out of his 401k 4 different times to pay off gambling debt.
Wow, okay.
And so, and when I say gambling, it's not like he owed people, he wasn't,
he wasn't getting his kneecaps broken, but he would go to a casino and lose it.
And he would get cash advances on his credit cards, and that's a lot of times how he funded, his
brutal.
Brutal's right. So that was it was interesting. So my mom grew up in a relatively low-income household in the Twin, in the actual in the city proper, and she just never had a lot of money. And she worked as a seamstress. She's amazing at what she does. She has a lot of high-profile clients and makes great money. But she was the one who was kind of teaching me. She wrote out the bills, and she was the one who would had me get my first credit card at 16 and put gas on it once a month and pay it off and start building a credit score. And my dad was really good at the investing side. You need to start a Roth IRA as soon as I started as soon as I graduated college when I had my own money to start. I wish I would have started earlier, but that was early enough. So it was interesting because they both were reasonably financially savvy or good with money.
Or they knew how to make money.
They knew how to make money, especially my dad. But then there was that other piece that just destroyed it. Destroyed it. So
and then you became a financial advisor.
Did eventually, yes. I had done a lot of different things, but so I actually.
How long did you do that, and why? And did you like it? And then why did you stop doing that? And then tell me that. What was your first job? Finance job.
Well, so my first finance job was in auditing at Wells Fargo, downtown Minneapolis, and it was pretty boring.
Yeah,
kind of. Not much of a sit behind a screen and so and not talk to people. That was so. I did that, and I was like, oh, I definitely don't want to do that. And I was an econ major in college, and I thought about teaching at some point. And I played college soccer, and I was like, oh, I could teach and coach. And I did end up doing that. So I went back to school, graduate school, got my teaching license, taught business classes for 5 years at the high school level.
Where did you play soccer?
UW, Eau Claire, and Hamline University. So just smaller schools up in the Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yeah. Okay.
So short stint there, but I was really into soccer, and I'd coached youth soccer in college and after college. And so anyway, so I then at 5 years there, it was great. I liked it. I liked working with kids, but enough things had changed. There was enough politics. I was I thought about financial advising after college, but never did it. And I was like, this is the time. We don't have kids yet. Now's the time. I'm gonna try.
So you went from coaching.
Coaching and teaching.
To being a financial advisor.
Yeah.
And then how many years did you do that?
I did that about 2.5 years before our oldest was born, and when she was about almost 1, I decided to take a step back. So it's funny when you have children. I was very career driven, and I had my first, and then about 10 months in, I was I kept cutting back my hours and seeing less clients and doing less, and I was my heart is not in it, and I wanna not in it, and I want to spend more time with my kid. So I did that. So I actually I started taking on financial coaching clients because I knew that was kind of the time too where the laptop lifestyle or whatever people want to call it, where you could work anywhere, was starting to gain momentum. I was I learned about
laptop lifestyle. It's another term. Or for dessert, you can have a laptop lifestyle here on the Fireman.
In Austin.
Then you transition to financial coaching.
Yep.
And then really writing. So
writing,
you write for a ton of different outlets.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, so I tell people I did writing. I was always interested in writing growing up, loved English, excelled in that, wrote for fun, wrote after college, but then I took a long break. I was in the finance or the teaching world, the finance world, and I just kind of fell back into it. And Business Insider was one of the first people I started writing for because I was sharing our fire journey, and then I was brought on as a writer, and then I started, just writing more. And so, it's been quite the journey, but a fun one. And
what's the financial coaching part of it like? And then maybe we also pair that with what drives, let's say, poor financial habits of people that are locked into them.
Yeah.
And is that a piece of doing financial coaching, helping people break those habits, or do you typically see people once they've figured out to have better habits and they're smart enough to say, hey, I need some help and I need a coach?
Yeah, so I actually started financial coaching because of my experience as a financial advisor. So I'd meet with people and we'd talk about their finances and their financial plan, and we talk about investments and insurance needs, and then I realized people would come to me for debt payoff plans. And at the time I wasn't charging a fee to work with clients. That wasn't the model of the broker dealer that I was with.
It was really more about assets or products. At broker dealer, it was all about products.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was helping these people but not getting paid, which fine, I didn't mind doing, but the more I did it, the more I realized people have some really basic, what I would consider basic, but not basic for everybody, but financial needs that are not being met. And then it's you tell people, create a budget and just stick to the budget, and here's how much you'll be able to put towards investments or save an emergency fund or whatever else you might want to be doing. But it's not as black and white as and I know. Finances are not black and white. And if you have something like a shopping addiction or a gambling addiction on the extreme case, or if you have just other blocks, things that are going on that are not allowing you to be good with money.
Overly aggressive investor, overly conservative investor. There's all those emotions tied to how you're going to invest money.
Yep.
Does this play into, you talk about, I know in some of your writing, you talk about something called a money story. Tell us about what that concept is, a money story.
Yeah.
Or is it a money story? What is it?
I think, money story, so money story is the story, the way you think about and behave with money that is influenced by mainly your upbringing. So how, and just your past and how your parents viewed and used money, and maybe, other people, influential adults that were around you, aunts and uncles or grandparents or people that you saw that and things that you were taught about money, from a young age. And most kids don't get formal financial education in school. It's not a requirement, as I wish.
Not at all.
As I wish it was.
Not at all.
No, it should be. So the money story is how all that shapes the way you use money,
or think about money.
Yep, and it can be you could have a positive money story. You had great role models, and you have a really healthy sense about how to use money and make it work for you. Or you could have a very negative money story where it's like there's never enough money and I'm terrible at money. And it's like the internal dialogue that you tell yourself about money is what I consider to be like your money story.
And do you try to nail that down when you do your coaching?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Just trying to figure out, because when people come to me.
It's a good idea to think about, like, to have somebody try to define their money story. Like, what is that? So it's always it's like your personality profile when it comes to money.
Yeah. And
it's cool.
I think people don't realize it. They don't realize what a money story is, or if they even have one. But then when you start diving into it, it's like, oh, well, then that makes sense why I always, when I get paid, I need to go out and spend all the money right away, or why I can't seem to spend a dime, like the opposite problem. I'm super frugal and I can't seem to spend any money, even though it's stuff I want to spend money on, because maybe my parents told me, that's how they were, that's what they did. And so
it's funny. I think what I've maybe did a version of that with the new book that I have coming out called What the Happiest Retirees Know. I've always studied this relationship between money and happiness, and I've literally done empirical research on the money, financial lifestyle, social, marital habits, and how they tie back to finances. With those who are self-identified as more in happier, higher quintiles versus unhappy. Yeah. And to me, I've been fascinated with that topic. How much money you need to be happy, or what are these levels to get to when it comes to money and happiness. And maybe it's because my money story, and we were talking about this today with Mallory, is that I lived in kind of in the middle of a huge, almost like a financial barbell world where right next door was a bunch of Amish folks. My dad was a general veterinarian. We lived next to Amish. It's like living in the 18th century. They had virtually living without a whole lot of money at all. Yeah. And then when you live in the country, you tend to live around these big horse farms that are like $50 million horse farms. And I think as a kid, I was kind of always, my head was on this back and forth, like, wait a minute, these people have really no money, and they are, even if you gave them $10 million, you're still going to live with lanterns. Yep. And then you've got these fancy horse farms, and maybe that was part of my money story of trying to figure out, why am I always studying this money happiness relationship? Maybe that's part of my money story. Plus, my dad, even though he was a good business guy and earned a lot of money, he is still, he's alive and well and retired, but very non-interested in the money. Really almost like grew up as a little bit of a hippie. Yeah. And is still to this day, he doesn't really even care how much he has. He knows he has plenty. Yeah. But he doesn't care about it, doesn't think about it, doesn't want to know what's invested in. Yeah. But he was always very excited about growing his practice, his veterinary practice. And I think that's part of the reason I'm very, again, can't get away from the thought of what are we doing in our business, how are we growing it, maybe that the money story that you just talked about, I just rehashed mine. Thank you for that conversation. I'm going to shed a tear after that. You went through some money trauma. I mean, that's a pretty heavy story about growing up with that. What should we be asking our parents about, or what should you be teaching your kids at this point? And I guess my question, I go to adult parents. How much do we need to know about our own parents' finances? And do you ever talk about that? Do you ever write about that? And do you ever talk to your parents about money anymore? Yeah,
so I have written about talking to parents about money, or talking to your kids about money. And I do, working in finance. My dad passed away 8 years ago, so I do not talk about money with him obviously anymore. And he taught, at the end, he taught me a lot about, good and bad ways to use your money. He was always like a live for the moment guy, sees life. And, he happened to have, he got terminal illness and they gave him a short lifespan, but he outlived it by years. Because I think he, his sense of, lived was like, I'm going to go have fun for a few years. And he moved to Europe and he had a great time. And I'm like, I think that's what helped him live longer, is that he, wasn't. And he actually took an early retirement. So he, when he was diagnosed with terminal illness, he retired at 58. And so he was like, that's fine, I got enough money. No, I'm sorry, he was 55. He passed away at 58. So 54, 55, he's like, okay, I'm done, I got enough money saved.
And he had 3 pretty good years left?
He had, about 4 years. Yeah, and so, I didn't really, I knew what he had in his retirement accounts for the most part. And I knew what he did, like his, was fine. My mom talked about it a lot because we would talk about what was going on, and, not that I could help with anything, but, I was a sense of kind of like, sounding board for her growing up. And to this day, we still, like talk about money pretty openly. And I think I'm really comfortable with talking about money, like how much we make. And, I don't think my husband always loves that I'm like,
Here's what
I'm
we
sharing
make.
our life story on Business Insider. But
right.
No, he's actually really smart, so I should say that. But a lot of people aren't that comfortable. And I think to try to start that conversation, it could just be like, I'm starting to think more about how I view money. Like, and maybe if they have kids themselves, they can be like, I'm trying to think about how I want to teach, Junior about money.
My kids,
and then asking that, your parents or the grandparents of the kid, like, what did your parents teach you about money? Or like, what did they say about money? Because like for my parents, it was like, money doesn't grow on trees. And that was something I heard all the time growing up. And, so I think it's just being like starting that conversation and then being aware of like, oh, like my parents said that, or their parents said that, and that influenced them, and that's why they influenced me. Because everybody is just doing the best that they can, right, with what they know and how they grew up. And
you got your mom. You got 2 kids, 2 and 4.
Yep.
And you've got tons of what I guess I call these core pursuits, which are just hobbies on steroids. But you've got a lot of these in your life, I think, right? Or travel / yoga. Like, what are your big core pursuits?
I mean, travel is up there, I would say, as like the number one pursuit. We love taking our kids and traveling. It's been obviously a little bit harder in the last year or so, but as much as we can, like they're great travelers. Like they've been a lot of places. Our goal is always like we want to go internationally at least once a year. And I think that that's.
Wait, why is that important? Do you think to you guys? Why is it important to you and your husband?
I think it's just like it's easy to get caught in a bubble of where you live, whether it's your city or your state or the country you live in. And when you get out of your comfort zone and you go to different states, but also like different countries, I think it opens your mind up to like so many other possibilities. And I feel like most at peace when I'm traveling. Like I love being immersed in other cultures and seeing how they do things. My grandma came to the U.S. as by herself when she was 18, went from Ireland to England at 16 by herself, and so she, I think a lot of that comes from her. Like she's very adventurous. Like we're gonna hopefully take her back to Ireland next year, and she's 95 for her 95th birthday. And I think it's just like, opens your mind and just expands like your worldview, I guess.
Yeah,
it makes you more compassionate about what other people do and how they live their lives, and also like helps you examine your own and be like, oh, why do we do that in our culture, in our country, when we could be doing it another way.
I've almost forgotten about travel when it comes to outside of the U.S. I did it a lot, and I think I draw on those times. I lived in Spain for 6 months. I went to Europe a bunch as a kid for several, and it really is interesting, the memories of that and what it taught me. But because of having little kids, making it a little harder to travel internationally, at least the shock of having kids, and then we had a bunch of them, and then you get to COVID, and we have been really. It's been a long time since I've been anywhere overseas. So, but I think it's a good point. Thank you for reminding me of that, because you really do. It does open your worldview up. Yeah. And it's easy to get caught in a bubble. So I like that reminder, by the way. I'm going to take that reminder to heart. All right, Katie Oelker, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Where do we find you?
You can find me, my website is just my name, Katie Oelker. It's a silent O.
So it's O-E-L.
It is, yep. Katie, K-A-T-I, yep. OELKER.com. You can find me on Instagram, Katie Oelker Media.
Ooh, Katie on Insta.
Okay. So those are the places that, the most, so.